News just coming in. Australia has cancelled the Quad meeting in Sydney after the US President Joe Biden postponed his trip to Australia due to debt ceiling negotiations in Washington. The Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said that the leaders of Australia, US, India and Japan would instead meet at the G7 in Japan this weekend. Now, of course, this comes even as the US President has had to curtail his visit to Australia as well as other countries, given the pressures of debt ceiling that the US faces. The standoff, of course, has meant that US President Joe Biden will be cutting short his trip. Without a deal, of course, the US could enter default on its $31.4 trillion debt as soon as the 1st of June. So the latest that we are getting in terms of this is that pressures due to debt ceiling have made sure that Joe Biden has to cut short his trip. Abhishek Kapoor is on the phone line with us. Abhishek, good morning. Abhishek, we are given to understand that instead that the leaders of these Quad countries will be meeting in Japan on the sidelines of the G7.
Well, the G7 is on obviously Nupur, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi is also all set to travel there, and whatever bilateral meetings happen on the sidelines of G7 stand, but there is still some clarity to emerge insofar as the Quad is concerned, because our Prime Minister's visit to Australia to participate in Quad is concerned. We remember this is a development of the last few hours where US President Joe Biden has cancelled his visit to Australia and Papua New Guinea, where Prime Minister Modi is also headed to. And he's heading back to Washington, D.C. because of this crisis that the U.S. government is facing, that of, taking care of the debt servicing rollover. And it's not the first time. This has happened 78 times already in the U.S. history. And it's possible that this would also happen this time as well. But then the kind of political bickering that the U.S. politics have seen over the last couple of years, it takes that much bit of extra emergency situation, and that's the reason why perhaps U.S. President has decided to cut short his rest of the Asia-Pacific visit and head back to Washington, D.C. after participating in G7. So insofar as India is concerned, whether the Quad happens or not, and of course Quad is not happening, but in that case where Prime Minister Modi would be traveling to Sydney to participate or to address the community event and sort of have a bilateral with the Australian Prime Minister, for that we have to wait for an NEA response. As I said, it's just a beginning that has just a statement that has come from the White House over the last few hours, and we'll have to see how the NEA responds. We have had a query with them, and I believe that there would be a response in a while. But what is important is that so far as the U.S. debt ceiling issue is concerned, it has some major consequences, not just for the U.S. citizens and the U.S. economy, but as a dominoes to the rest of the world as well. So it's a serious situation. Not that this is the first time. Every time it has happened, the U.S. Congress has really come together, cutting across party lines between Republicans and Democrats, and sorted this out. It's essentially a rollover of debt for which the Congress has to take a call. And most likely, like earlier, this time too, it would happen. But then, as I said, the backdrop of bitter politics that has panned out over the last few years, this time an element of urgency and emergency is also there, and that's why the U.S. President heading back, thus putting a question mark on Quad. As I said, we have to wait for a while before NEA response.
All right, Abhishek, do stay with us. In fact, let's quickly listen in to what the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has had to say about this.
I had a discussion with President Biden in the early hours of this morning. He expressed very much his disappointment at being unable to come to Sydney for the Quad leaders meeting and address the Parliament that had been scheduled for Canberra next week. The blocking and disruption that's occurring in domestic politics in the United States with the debt ceiling issue means that because that has to be solved prior to the 1st of June, otherwise there are quite drastic consequences for the US economy, which will flow on to the global economy. he understandably has had to make that decision. President Biden, though, indicated that he was very much looking forward to coming down at a future date when it can be arranged, and I will visit the United States for a state visit later this year. All four leaders, President Biden, Prime Minister Kishida, Prime Minister Modi and myself, will be at the G7 held in Hiroshima on Saturday and Sunday. We are attempting to get together over that period of time, as well as I'll have a bilateral discussion with President Biden. At this stage, we haven't got a time locked in for that arrangement. This is a decision that's been made overnight, our time, in the United States. The Quad Leaders meeting will not be going ahead in Sydney next week. We, though, will be having that discussion between Quad leaders in Japan. I thank Prime Minister Kishida for his invitation for me to attend the G7, and it is appropriate that we talk. The Quad is an important body, and we want to make sure that it occurs at leadership level, and we'll be having that discussion over the weekend.
All right, so that's the comment that has come in from Anthony Albanese over there, saying that they've had to cancel the Quad talks in Australia given the pressures that the US is facing over the crisis that is unfolding. Now, do remember that a failure by the US government to essentially meet its debt obligations will and could perhaps trigger a global financial crisis and global financial chaos. And that is why so much importance is being put on the Republicans and the Democrats being able to sort this issue out.